payoff. No doubt some of you are far too young to be playing with darts, but I quite enjoy the game. I'm rubbish at it, as you may have just noticed. But I don't know, there's just something kind of relaxing about just sitting back and flinging one at the board. I watched some people try and play darts one time in a basement, and they had this thing where whenever they missed by a bunch, well, it didn't bother them too much. They might be nowhere near the board like that last one, and it's okay. They would just go up to the board, and that's where the mark would be. Like, yeah, that's what we were aiming for. But it doesn't work that way, does it? No, there is a bullseye, and that's what you're trying to hit. I mean, boy, wouldn't we all love it if the target didn't matter, and we could just throw it any old way and see where they stuck. But no, to win the game, you gotta hit the right spot. You gotta get it nice and close. Well, we're gonna actually switch our direction of videos. We've been talking about the Old Testament. We're going to move to a new letter in the New Testament but we're going to continue talking about this thing of sin that we were talking about last week, and see how Paul addresses it in a letter he wrote. To do that, we're going to move over to the chalkboard. So you might remember last week when we talked about sin, I said that it is anything we do that is wrong, or anything we don't do that is right. Well, there's a lot of different ways that people explain sin. I don't want to poke myself with these. I just set them down carefully. And another way to put that is that we could say sin is anything we think, we do, or we say that goes against God's way. Sometimes we're throwing darts and we're talking about a target, because sometimes people talk about sin as missing the mark, right? Which means we don't go where we should. We don't do what we should. Now, sin is dangerous, and that's kind of what we want to talk about this morning, is 4 ways that sin is dangerous, or 4 consequences, if you will, of sin, that Paul talks about in his letter to the Romans. But first, why did he write them a letter? Why didn't he go? Well, he wanted to. I don't know if you've got a friend that lives somewhere far away and you would love to go see them, but when you can't go and see them as often as you would like, what do? Well, maybe you phone them. Maybe you send an email, maybe you text, maybe you jump on some video messenger thing and you see each other that way. And in Paul's day, all they had was letters. So he would write down what he would want to tell them, and someone would take that for him and then read in that group the words that he wrote. And so in this letter to the Christians in Rome, he had a lot to say about our relationship with God and about what sin does and doesn't do, and a lot of ways that it's dangerous. And so the first of 4 things we want to look at is this, that sin separates us from God, right? That's one thing. Like sin just causes us to away from the target and leads to separation, because God is holy, right? So when we are sinful, when we don't do the right thing, we move away from God. It's like a wall gets put up. And so that's one of the ways that sin is dangerous. Another is that sin controls the way we think, right? Have that one hit over here. Sin controls. So like when we get stuck doing what's wrong, it's all the harder to get back to doing what's right, right? We end up, it changes our desires. What we want to do is no longer the right thing that we should do. That's one of the dangers of sin. Another one is that, it brings bad consequences. Okay? Have that one flying over there. When we do what's wrong, whether we do what's right or do what's wrong, stuff happens afterwards as a result of that. That's what a consequence is. When we do what's right, quite often, good consequences come. But when we do what's wrong, what tends to happen more often than not is bad consequences. And sin is one of the ways that, more bad stuff keeps coming. But unfortunately, it doesn't always necessarily just affect us. Sometimes when we sin, what happens is people we love have to suffer with bad consequences too. And that's the last thing that Paul points out, is that in his letters, but also even all the way back to Genesis, is that when we do what's wrong, others have to suffer the consequences too. And so that's the last thing for us today on the dangers of sin, is that when we sin, sometimes other people get hurt. I don't know if you've ever done something like that. I remember one time I was playing around with a door. And I knew I shouldn't be playing around with the door, but I wanted to do it anyways, right? And I'm playing around with this door, and great news, I didn't get hurt. Bad news, a friend ended up getting the door smashed in their face and almost broke their nose. It was just a massive amount of blood and blah. It was so gross, right? Because I did what was wrong, because I sinned, a friend got really hurt. And so, real quick, again, the four things, right? There's other things that happen, other ways that sin is dangerous, but it separates us from God, right? It causes us, it makes it harder for us to do what's right? What we want changes. There's bad consequences, and also sometimes our friends, our family, our loved ones get caught up in those bad consequences, and it hurts other people we love. Now, if we just ended our lesson there, that'd be pretty depressing, right? Oh man, sin is bad. Great news, friends. Awesome news. God gives us an incredible gift. I don't know if you're counting down to Christmas yet. It's just a few weeks away. Super excited. But we have a gift from God that's every day available to us, and that's grace. Grace is an amazing gift from God, because it's God giving us what we don't deserve. It's giving us all of his goodness, the very best thing. In fact, it's God saying, you know what? I'm going to deal with all that. God takes away all the sin through Jesus, so that we're no longer separated from God. We can come back to him. What we want is changed, so that what we want through grace is more of God's goodness and closeness with him. What grace does is when our wants are changed, then we're more led in a way that will lead to better and better consequences. And as a result of that, our friends aren't getting hurt anymore, but instead they experience the grace of God in us overflowing and impacting their lives too. It's an amazing gift. And it's not just a once a year on your birthday or Christmas gift. It's an every single day gift. And it's what makes life with Jesus and life in God's family possible. You see, in the place of Rome, in the city that Paul was writing to, a lot of the people around town, they didn't think very highly of Christians. They were very suspicious of them. In fact, they thought they did all this weird stuff, and they didn't understand them. They didn't think that what they were doing was right. And so it was pretty hard for the Christians in that day to really do the right thing, because so much was against them. And yet, Paul wanted to encourage them, hey, don't get caught up in the doing what's wrong, doing what all the people around you are doing, but instead choose to do what is right. And come to Jesus, and he will help you in that. We've got a new verse for us that we're going to look at this week. And it really speaks to that idea of what life with Jesus and life in God's family is all about. And it's words that Jesus spoke in John 14, verse 5. Oh, sorry, verse 6. Okay? And this is what Jesus says. He says, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I'll say that one more time. John 14, verse 6, Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And what that verse points out is that, Jesus really clearly said a few things in there, right? First, that he is the only way to come to God. He's the only way to have that forgiveness, to receive that gift of grace, right? He is the truth, and we need to live our lives accordingly. Okay? He is the one who gives us eternal life. And so that, for me, is a great encouragement to know that Jesus makes a difference. To know that Jesus has shown us what is right. He's shown us not just what the target looks like, but he shows us how to actually hit the board. And speaking of that, I want to head back over there and share one last final point. You know, if you want to get good at darts and you want to make sure you hit the target more often than not, or even all the time, well, there's a few things you can do. You can watch how people do it. And that's okay, right? But that's still not going to turn you into a world-class darts player, watching other people. But it might help. You can practice lots. That would be good, right? But you also got to maintain your equipment. Make sure you have darts that aren't broken. Make sure that they're straight, not bent. Make sure that the little feathery bits, and of course these are just cheap plastic ones, but to make sure that you probably even notice I keep flexing them, right? I keep moving them because if they're all bent and crooked, they're not great. They're not going to fly very well. And when all of that comes together, well, you'll do all right. Kind of the same way, we could just watch how Jesus did it. Jesus said, right, that he is the way, the truth, the life, right? He came to show us the Father and show us what he's like and show us how to live. And so we've got a good example to follow. We're already part of the way there. But we need to make sure we put into practice what he said. You know, we need to do what he told us to do. We need to love people the way he did. We need to care the way he told us and showed us how to care. We need to prioritize the right things. Really, the word I think I'm looking for is we need to listen. Because there are a few things we can do to help make sure we, follow God's way and do what he wants. There's a lot of things we could do that will make it impossible to hit the target. It'd be sort of like pulling the feathers off a dart, or if I was to bend it. I could really damage these and make sure I never hit the target. So when we prioritize the wrong things, that's one way that we're pretty much guaranteeing we're not going to hit the mark. And what I mean by that is when we love other things more than God. That's kind of what I mean by prioritize. So like if I love my car more than God, or I love even some of my friends more than God, or I love anything, it's going to be harder to hit the mark. Or if I don't spend time with people who are going to make it easier for me to follow Jesus, then that's going to be a lot harder to hit the target too. It's going to be a lot harder to live God's way. Or for example, if I just ignore everything Jesus said, if I don't ever read the Bible, it's going to be almost impossible to hit that target. If I don't ever spend time with God, if I don't ever pray, if I don't ever come and ask him for answers, or just take time to say, God, what do you want me to know today? And I don't ever listen and create space for him to speak, then I'm probably never going to hit that target. It's sort of like, I don't know if you've ever tried to, if you've ever thrown darts. One of the things you got to know is you got to focus on what you're doing. You've got to pay attention. You've got to look at where you want it to go. That's pretty true of the Christian life too. We got to keep our eyes on Jesus and keep following after him. Otherwise, it's kind of like that. We might just fluke out and hit the target sometimes, but more often than not, our throws are going to be wild. They're going to be every which way. And that's not a good way to live. And that's what I want to leave you with as an encouragement this week. Jesus said he's the way, he's the truth, he's the life, and no one comes to God except through him. If we really want to enjoy a fullness in God's family, we've got to keep our eyes on him. We got to keep our eyes on the target. So I want to leave you with that. Friends, have an awesome week, and may you be encouraged to keep your eyes on Jesus. We'll see you again real soon.